This classic engraving depicts the defining imagery of Revelation 12, a woman clothed with the sun, pursued by a multi-headed dragon. Historically, biblical scholars interpret this text in one of two ways. It is either read as a spiritual allegory describing the persecution of the early Roman Church, or as a cryptic prophecy of a distant, abstract future. However, a specific strand of modern exegesis proposes a completely different approach, applying a rigid, historical, redemptive framework to the text. This hermeneutic makes a highly specific, geographic claim. It argues that verses 13 through 17 are not abstract metaphors, but a localized chronological blueprint detailing socio-political events in the Far East between the years 1900 and 1931. To test this claim, we are looking at this chronological map. On the left is the ancient text of Revelation 12. On the right, a hard timeline of Chinese socio-political history spanning the early 20th century. By locking these two columns together, we can track the evolving identity of the text's antagonist. We will follow its metamorphosis from a powerful dragon to a weakened serpent, and finally back to a dragon, observing how these textual shifts align with actual historical events. The goal here is not to debate secular history. We are reverse engineering a complex cryptographic system that translates ancient apocalyptic symbols into a precise taxonomy of modern geopolitical persecution. Before reaching 1900, the framework establishes a prehistory. Verses 1 through 12 are interpreted as a summary of historical labor pains, specific events like the enslavement in Egypt, the Babylonian exile, and Herod's decrees. These are viewed as systemic attempts by an adversarial force to stop the birth of the Messiah. The text then describes a cosmic turning point. Christ ascends, and the archangel Michael definitively defeats Satan, expelling him from heaven. Because the adversary loses its legal standing in the heavenly court, the conflict undergoes a structural change. The battlefield is now strictly confined to the physical earth. This map illustrates the geographic logic of the framework. Following the historical expansion of the gospel over 2 millennia, the movement vectors outward from Jerusalem, pushing steadily eastward across Asia until it reaches China. In this model, the Far East represents both the literal and theological ends of the earth. It is the final geographic stage for this expanding conflict. By anchoring the theological end of the map to China, the framework justifies resetting the apocalyptic timeline directly to 1900. The timeline begins at verse 13, which states, "The dragon persecutes the woman." The framework maps this directly to the year 1900, identifying the antagonist's first earthly assault as state-sponsored kinetic violence. Historically, this manifests as the late Qing Dynasty aligning with the Boxer Rebellion. It was a coordinated, systemic purge designed to eradicate foreign missionaries and local converts. This archival photograph captures a Chinese Christian pastor and his family. They are specifically identified in the historical record as a demographic uniquely targeted and hated by the Boxer movement. The text then moves to verse 14, where the woman is given the 2 wings of a great eagle to escape. This is decoded as the intervention of a powerful, secular military force arriving to secure the church's survival. These marching foreign soldiers represent that historical eagle. In 1901, the 8-nation alliance deployed military intervention, directly countering the Qing state's violence. This military action resulted in the 1901 Boxer Protocol. By legally establishing protected embassy zones and allowing foreign garrisons along key routes, the treaty created the exact conditions of the biblical wilderness, a harsh but legally protected sanctuary. Revelation specifies this protection lasts for a time, times, and half a time, symbolically 3.5 years. The framework maps this to a roughly 20-year window of stabilized protection in China, from 1901 to 1921. Because international treaties neutralized its ability to use direct state violence, the adversarial force is compelled to evolve its methodology to maintain the offensive. Moving to verse 15 and the year 1922, the text reveals a linguistic downgrade. The powerful dragon morphs into a smaller serpent. Structurally, this indicates a loss of direct political and state power. The adversary can no longer execute physical purges, forcing a shift to asymmetric warfare. Verse 15 describes the serpent spewing water like a river to sweep the woman away. To decode this, the framework references the biblical contrast between the living water of truth and bitter water that poisons. In this context, the serpent's river represents a flood of propaganda and information warfare. This photograph shows the historical manifestation of that flood, the 1922 anti-Christian movement. Driven by protesting intellectuals, student organizations, and a sudden surge of print media, it was a massive, nationwide ideological assault. Prominent progressive leaders such as Chen Dushou spearheaded this intellectual purge, utilizing science and nationalism as rhetorical weapons. The serpent's strategic goal was specific: frame the church as a tool of cultural imperialism. If the public accepted this narrative, the state could legally strip religious institutions of their educational and societal authority. The resolution to this conflict arrives in verse 16, which states, "The earth opened its mouth and swallowed the river." The framework maps this to a sudden, violent socio-political intervention in 1927. This image documents the historical earth. On April 12, 1927, Chiang Kai-shek initiated a massive, brutal political purge, utilizing military force to arrest and eliminate leftists and communists. This extreme state suppression effectively swallowed the progressive organizations driving the propaganda flood, forcibly terminating the intellectual movement. The adversary's tactics have now been neutralized twice. Having failed at both kinetic violence and information warfare, it is cornered into its final eschatological escalation. Defeated on two fronts, the dragon abandons its broad attack on the church. Verse 17 states it becomes enraged and goes off to wage war against the rest of her offspring. The key to this verse lies in the original Greek. The text uses a singular root word for offspring or seed. The target is no longer a plural collective, it is one specific individual. The timeline identifies this singular seed as Chiang Kai-shek. He was formally baptized as a Christian in 1930, right as he consolidated immense political and military power. The exegesis presents a distinct theological claim here. God acknowledges this specific leader's newfound faith, honoring him precisely as he becomes the focal point of intense, coordinated political vilification. This sets up the final stage of Revelation 12. The text concludes, "The dragon stood on the shore of the sea." On the timeline, we arrive at 1931, and the serpent upgrades back into a full dragon. In biblical literature, the sea consistently functions as a symbol of chaos, danger, and the origin point of anti-divine forces. This group photograph from 1931 shows the historical proxy for that event, the establishment of the Chinese Soviet Republic in Ruzhin. Geopolitically, the dragon has regained its physical state form. It is now backed by the vast, chaotic sea of the Soviet Comintern, heavily supplied with foreign funding, organization, and ideology. This final metamorphosis secures the ultimate ideological and military deadlock of the 20th century in the Far East. If we pull back from the specific dates, the entire hermeneutical model resolves into a single interconnected system. This exegesis maps an adaptive taxonomy of conflict, moving beyond simple date matching to illustrate how a single adversarial force evolves when its primary methods are blocked. We see the first evolutionary track, direct state violence in 1900, neutralized by international treaties. Forced to adapt, it shifts to asymmetric information warfare in 1922, which is subsequently crushed by a political purge. Finally, it escalates to the creation of rival ideological proxy states in 1931. For the scholar, the theological premise becomes a secondary concern compared to the internal consistency of the model. Each textual shift in the antagonist's identity, from dragon to serpent and back, aligns with a documented change in historical tactical methodology. This text showcases how ancient apocalyptic literature is continually re-engineered by scholars to serve as a structural lens for decoding modern